To begin, I'd like to ask all of you, if you're comfortable, to please close your eyes. And I invite you to take a deep breath in and out. And then begin to visualize our gathering here as you would a sacred grove of trees. And just like our song earlier, feel yourself to have roots that go down deep into the earth. And your roots intertwine with other roots, giving energy and life to each other. All our roots are touching right now. And our branches that grow out of our bodies and the top of our head reach out towards each other. And we feel the sun shine on our leaves and the breeze ever so softly swaying us. And just breathe in the good feeling of peace and belonging in this ancient forest. Such is the life of a tree when it is rooted in its community of thriving and flourishing. And thank you. Thank you, everyone. You may open your eyes if you had them closed. Such is the life of a tree. When I was a child, I genuinely thought trees were magic. I was that barefoot kid in a tree most days, and depending on the time of year and the thick or sparse foliage, the trees in my yard were the best kind of playmates, especially for this only child. Fig tree was my spaceship in the winter with all of its craggy little buttons and knots. Beep, 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 beep. And young magnolia made for the best tree to play house in. And the 3 mature orange trees at the front of my yard were my jungle, and I was a world-class swinging, hanging upside down monkey. And the massive sycamore in my backyard was, I called her Friendly Giant. She was my first hugging tree. And when I got big enough, I was able to make it up to her lowest branch, and I would stuff myself into like the crook of what I thought was her arm and would pretend that she was holding me in her magical arms. I was sharing this with a good friend and colleague of mine, Reverend Emily Bruce, who serves a UU church in Kingston, Massachusetts. She's a fellow tree lover. And she told me that in Louisiana, where she grew up, that the reason pine trees grow so close together down there, closer than where other pine trees grow, is that so that they can protect and hold each other up in heavy storms, like hurricanes. And she marveled recently, such seemingly inanimate things actually know how to take care of each other. I had never considered how the trees in my childhood yard might also be taking care of each other, not just me, right? You see, trees They don't discriminate by species. In fact, the difference makes them stronger. And in recent years, you well know there has been a boon of best-selling books and documentaries revealing the wondrous science and mystery of trees. It's captivated us, hasn't it? The complex web of life that teems beyond and beneath what we can see with our eyes or even imagine. In Peter Wohlleben's popular book, The Hidden Life of Trees, I know some of you have read it, you've mentioned it to me. He teaches that tree roots, they extend a long, long way down and out. So the root systems of neighboring trees, they intersect and grow into one another. Healthy trees share water and nutrients through these root systems with weaker trees. And contrary to the forest industry's advisement, which tells us to create large swaths of space between trees so that they grow well, the healthiest and longest living key of trees grow close to one another so that nutrients and water can be optimally divided among them. And fascinating to consider is the idea of removing these less strong or less flourishing neighboring trees to get rid of the competition, right? For sunlight or water or whatever. By getting rid of them, it actually weakens the grove. Wohlleben says that the remaining trees become bereft, and they send messages out to their neighbors in vain, photosynthesizing like mad until sugar positively bubbles along their trunk, and as a result, yes, they grow faster, which is what the forest industry wants and tells us that we all want, but they aren't long-lived. This is because a tree's life can only be as strong as the forest that surrounds it. Wohlleben says that when the supposedly feeble trees disappear, the others lose as well. Even more fantastic to consider is that even seemingly healthy, big, grand trees, they get sick and weakened a lot over the course of their lives. When this happens, they depend on their seemingly weaker neighbors for support. And if they are no longer there, then all it takes is what would once have been a harmless, say, insect attack to seal the fate of giants. Trees don't just care for each other. Especially in old growth forests, the branches of the trees, they stop growing outward as they approach each other so that they can leave space for sunlight to filter down to the flora on the forest floor. Their relationships and awareness always spanning beyond themselves to their surroundings in this stunning web of reciprocity. Giving and taking, connected by and with soil and fungi, flora, fauna, squirrel, climbing girl. As Robin Wall Kimmerer writes in Braiding Sweetgrass, our elders, the trees, are standing together for the benefit of all. We are remembering what they said and continue to say, that all flourishing is mutual. All flourishing is mutual. Now, I told you last week that our month's worship theme of justice and equity are key touchstones in our faith's newly articulated purpose, but we also know as Unitarian-Universalists, these aren't obviously new concepts, right? They have for hundreds of years spoken to the heart of our forebears, and we understand that what justice and equity have to teach us about ourselves and the communities we live in, of course, is in continuous flux. So we're reevaluating what it means right now as people of faith. Continuous flux, not unlike a complex old growth forest. We too are adapting and evolving and letting things go, tightening our stand against new weather systems, right? And trying to share equally in flourishing and thriving. And two things jumped out to me as I recently reread the New Language to describe what justice and equity look like as tenets of our lived faith. For justice, the New Language is this: we work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. That is what justice means. And for equity, it says, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worth. All thrive. Every person has the right to flourish. Profound. To do justice, we really have to get that we all must thrive. To be equity, we really have to get that every person has the right to flourish. My childhood home, as many of you know, was in California, Southern California. And observing the relentless forest fires devouring the landscape and life out there, I can't help but see these ongoing tragedies for how we as human beings aren't doing justice and equity very well. We aren't doing thriving and flourishing very well. What a painful outward display of our scorched, interdependent web of existence. And when I tell you that trees and the wisdom of nature teach us about hope and healing and reconciliation and repair, true belonging, thriving and flourishing, I don't say this to be cute. Our very survival and theirs depends on our understanding of these truths and this wisdom. Those fires, and my God, the smoke that we can all remember traveled thousands of miles to descend on us all the way out here in Massachusetts. It might be better viewed as the great lighting of the beacons, and this is the second time I'm referring to Lord of the Rings here in the sanctuary in a month. For those who haven't read the books or watched the films, the beacons were these massive open-air bonfires on the tops of mountains that, when lit, would trigger another one and another one and another one to be lit, so that the great cry of help would be transmitted to friends in far-off places, right? And Aragorn shouts, "The beacons are lit! Gondor calls for aid!" And off they go. Might we also respond with the same fever-pitched urgency? This is certainly what trees are doing for each other. And reckoning with this is so difficult. For my part, I find a lot of theological grounding in the ancient goddess traditions, where earth was understood to be a divine body, to be cherished and revered. Every rock, waterway, tree, and creature, a revelation. Manifestations of the goddess herself come to teach us of the mysteries true. And these earth-based traditions where all beings sought to live together in balance and mutual flourishing, preceded the Jewish and Christian traditions, whose sacred texts are essentially a series of beacon lightings, cautionary tales that hold a mirror up to humanity as a call to action. For in the beginning was balance. We call this place Eden or paradise, a time before humans' desire for domination and power and wealth and a voracious consumption practice at the cost of humanity. Literally hell on earth, right? Before Constantine twisted Christianity into a faith of sacrifice and domination and empire, this restoration of balance, paradise as possible on earth, was a central tenet of Christian theology. We call this pre-Nicene Christianity, when Christians weren't even called Christians. They were enlightened Jewish mystics, as was Jesus, a wise teacher who understood about thriving, flourishing, reciprocity, mutuality, paradise on earth, and he told the people that it is up to us, and that this was what it meant to be soaked through with God. Thriving and flourishing together, here in this life. And this is, by the way, the basis for our Universalist theology, that there is no afterlife, no hell or heaven. It's here in this life for us to be and to build paradise or hell. It is this kind of grounding and powerful prophetic theology that gives me hope, and it guides my life. And most often, the sacred text I read is nature, and I know I'm not alone in that. You see, trees and the rest of the natural world are flourishing and thriving in plenty of places all around us, teaching us about this paradise of mutuality and care. And we keep trying to disavow them of this, but nevertheless, they persist. The stunning environmental activist and writer Terry Tempest Williams recently shared about the regeneration that can happen after forest fires. She talks about the mushrooms that spring from the ash as the ground begins to cool, the pine cone seeds that scatter only in extreme heat, ensuring the next generation of trees. She explains that there are indigenous ways of forest burning that bring back a cacophony of life, she says, after a fire, and help Earth heal and regenerate herself. In her poem, A Burning Testament, Williams writes, "We are not the only species that lives and loves and breathes on this planet called Earth. Trees will grow and forests will rise again as living testaments to how one survives change." She writes, "I will mark my heart with an X made of ash that says the power to restore life resides here. I will mark my heart with an X made of ash that says the power to restore life resides here." We as a community and people can and should glean hope from this. Like our ancient wisdom teachers, tree and human, we have to know that it's up to us to create paradise on earth in the small way that we can. How might we here in this church consider where we need to adjust how our branches grow so that others might take in some sun and grow strong? How might we do a better job of seeing diversity of thought, of belief, of body as better nourishing us, literally extending our lives and the life of this church? And how do each of us ask for care ourselves? We cannot be the strong oak all the time. Even they grow weary and sick. Or when ministry's here, I'm thinking right now about our kids and our youth and our exhausted parents are not thriving and flourishing. They're getting by. There's a difference between getting by and flourishing. How might each of us get deep in our bones that we can't thrive either? Apply this to racial justice, LGBTQIA justice, environmental justice, green sanctuary here in this community. That's a big one. Are we really doing all we can here in this community to help our planet thrive and flourish? To help all humans thrive and flourish here? I say we can do better. We can always do better. There is always room to grow. And I wanted to put in there that no pun was intended, but that pun was intended. There's always room to grow. I love a good pun. But there is, right? Right? We don't need to hang our heads in shame here. There's always room to grow. Thriving and flourishing is all about an ethic of belonging. And trees can teach us about this. It is, after all, their guiding ethic. And I think this is a good moment to listen to the words of our tree poem again. Part 3, written by Black sociologist and wise teacher, Kiera Toney, who writes, "I think I'd rather be a tree, to stand in my bareness effortlessly secure, remarkable in any light, enriched by the world in the way it ought to be for each living thing, embellished by my age and experiences, to give and to receive without expectation, to be nurturing and nurtured without doubt, to have a place that is mine in the world, in a system which knows it needs me and I it, to be timeless, rigidly planted yet open to entertain the push and pull of the wind, rightfully proud to be as big as I am meant to be, earnestly believing that when my time is done, I've done all I was born to do, expecting when that season comes, as it inevitably will, to elegantly fall back into the earth to await my next assignment." My spiritual companions, let us not forget the persistence of paradise. Let us not forget the sacred grove of belonging that we visualized and felt a part of earlier, or our voices, young and old, combined in a stomping cacophony of life singing about our roots going down. As my dear Louisiana friend, Reverend Emily Bruce says, as earth reckons with grief and greed and trauma, we too grapple with a history and a culture that have moved us far from paradise. But in that grappling, may we also know that the power to restore, regenerate, and reimagine a thriving, flourishing life anew also resides here. It always has, and I have to believe that it always will. And so may we all mark our hearts with X's made of ash and loudly proclaim that the power to restore life resides here. May it be so, and amen.